All right, so good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to anyone who has joined this webinar today where we're gonna talk about latest and greatest in Test Studio and how the new features that we have just released would help you accelerate your development and ensure quality for your Telerik and CanDoUI built applications. Today, the hosts would be myself, Peter. I'm working for Telerik, the company that stands behind Test Studio, and my colleague and friend and boss, Andy Wieland, who will be presenting with myself as well, with you guys. What's the agenda for today? We're going to cover what's new in Test Studio, right? Of course, the latest and greatest feature, which is the brand new desktop testing that we have introduced and rolled out already. And of course, some other modifications that we have released, like extensionless testing for Chromium Edge, some UI UX modifications, some AI-infused cool stuff and features that you're gonna see, and so on and so forth. We're gonna provide 2 poll questions throughout the webinar for you. You know, as a product and as a company, we rely on customer feedback really a lot. So your feedback would be much appreciated by answering those few poll questions that we are gonna send you guys. The demos will follow the presentation, meaning that we'll go through some slides over the decks, and then we'll have some live demos afterwards. Remember, let's not wait till the very end of this session. If you have any questions, should ask us directly via the GoToWebinar questions panel. And I do promise you a lot of fun today. We'll remember all the fun years from school when we had to do some maths and some drawings and recall how they were with that. Right. With this said, before we proceed further, we would initiate the first poll question. Let's give it 1 minute or so for all of you to participate and answer, and we'll continue with the demo. The question is, what type of application do you currently use? And so far, the web apps are dominating, like with 70 up to 80%. And now I see that half of you guys are using desktop Windows as well, and some 20% or so answer mobile.
Looks like maybe a mix of web and desktop.
Yeah, exactly.
You can answer more than one, apparently.
Absolutely. And it seems that every second attendee is using also desktop Windows, so you're exactly on the right place, guys. For that.
Yeah, it looks a little obvious here. You can see the combinations. You can, of course, select more than one, so it doesn't just add up to 100%, but primarily everybody's working with web, and half of you working with desktop as well, and a quarter with mobile. So, nice.
Nice. And yeah, thank you very much, guys, one more time. For that, we continue with the journey and the presentation after the poll question is done. So I know most of you, I see some familiar names here, but let's say there are some folks here who join for the first time, or who are jumping into the beautiful world of automation for the first time, or will hear or see Test Studio for the first time, right? And because of that, we have prepared a few slides here to outline what actually Test Studio does, right? Or as I like to call it, my little elevator pitch here that I have prepared for you guys. And Test Studio is a platform, right? Our main idea is to deliver results and avoid bugs by not delivering them, right? It exists in a standalone or a Visual Studio plugin format and allows you from completely codeless to low code or to full code solution for UI automation testing. And not only that, Test Studio supports any type of web application that could run in a browser that exists out there. And now with the latest release, it also supports WPF and desktop automation. And I can see that the very first question, by the way, that some of you already asked into the panel was the difference between WPF and desktop? Aren't they the same actually? What are you going to do with WPF testing? Stay tuned. We have prepared slides exactly for that throughout the presentation, and you see what it is about. On top of that, we have our responsive apps that you can test, meaning that you can check how your application looks, feels, and behaves on any screen size, being your phone, tablet, washing machine, fridge, and whatever can run an application. Nowadays, additional benefits that this platform offers you is the load and performance testing accompanied by full RESTful API testing that could be hooked to one of the most popular databases that exists out there to ease your data-driven testing. Test Studio by itself allows you to not only create, but also schedule and run those test scripts. Of course, if you already practice and have some CI/CD servers or environments or best practices set up, no worries by that. Test Studio fits very well and talks to and integrates to any popular CI/CD system that exists out there, right? No need to mention any name, whatever you can think of, we could support and plug into that, right? It also has some very cool reporting features which allow you to either create extensive reports within the tool itself or view them in a web format and share them with all of your stakeholders if you want via the so-called executive dashboard. And I think that my 30 seconds or so elevator pitch is ready and we can continue further. Don't forget that everybody has a seat on Agile, on the Agile DevOps table. It doesn't matter if you're a quality assurance engineer or the ones who develop the application itself, like the developers themselves, or you are dealing with the DevOps and IT part of your software development lifecycle, or you are the manager or the one who deals with unit testing and debugging. The whole idea of Test Studio and the other productivity tools that Telerik offers is to fit and be one of the building blocks of your entire software development lifecycle. So enough with the presentations and overviews and pitches. So let's move on and see what's new in Test Studio with the release, which is already out for the ones of you who haven't updated your Test Studio editions. Please do so. There are three main bullets here to discuss. First and foremost, the biggest star, the biggest highlight of this release, and if you ask me personally, of the entire year, is the official release of the desktop automation. Up until now, for the ones who have been following us and been sticking with Test Studio, you know that is it already 2 months ago, somewhere in July, we released the very first desktop testing automation functionality by naming the so-called desktop testing beta version, right? So this is no more. Now, as of the latest version of Test Studio, we have officially released desktop test automation and brought on all the major features that, some of the major features that were existing in the already web and WPF testing, apart with the different verifications. From the visual recorder, we now have the advanced recording tools. We now have the step builder. You could change, edit, or create coded steps for desktop tests as well, meaning that this would live into the Test Studio dev. This functionality will live and already lives into the Visual Studio plugin edition of Test Studio. Right. The other stuff that we released is the extensionless testing. Family increases now. Up until now, we supported Google Chrome. With this latest version, Test Studio also supports extensionless testing for Chromium Edge browsers. You know, guys, the era of the extensions in general for those browsers is coming to an end. Very soon they would be obsolete. But not only that, by providing extensionless mode of testing, Test Studio helps you definitely simplify your setup of the entire test scripts build. They become now more faster to create, execute, and maintain. And of course, they're pretty much more secure now without the necessity of having to install different extensions on your browser. And stay tuned. This is a very cool, curious feature, which I call Testability Improvement Bundle. We'll talk about some nice AI-infused logic that lies behind Test Studio that makes the elements that you identify on the screen much more stable and helps you avoid some random fails during the test creation and execution. And for the ones who haven't seen the new starting page of Test Studio, it is one of the first steps of our total UI UX modernization story and effort here. Starting with the desktop applications and why actually are they so important? I can bet that every one of you, it doesn't matter if you're dealing only with web applications at the moment, have or had in the near future the necessity to perform tests on some kind of desktop application. You know, if we are to compare them to the web apps themselves, they are quite mature and tested in time, and there are still some behemoths of desktop applications that are being used and that would be used for the times ahead because they're quite reliable. They're business critical. Imagine you can think of all the banking, financial, healthcare, government institutions, even technology companies that have those huge desktop applications that would stay for the time being and maybe will not be modernized at all. Right, exactly because they are reliable and critical for the business. Being such, they're quite difficult to rewrite and replace. And the curiosity, I have shared some statistics here with you right before COVID struck. So up until 2019, they're constantly growing in numbers. Right. You can see the different platforms for the development of such desktop applications and the preferred technology of creating such desktop apps. Of course, WPF and WinForms are still holding first place. But remember, this statistic was before the introduction of .NET MAUI, which we're going to talk about a little bit later throughout this presentation. Right, and this is one of my favorite slides, which actually would be quite obsolete in a month or so, where .NET 7 would be officially announced and introduced by by Microsoft. But you can see the current state of the .NET apps, and we could thank Microsoft for creating such a diversity. At the moment, it doesn't matter if it is for web, desktop, or mobile, but especially on the desktop side, there is a huge diversity. Some folks still using starting Windows 32 applications to WinForms to WPF. Some other folks are thinking of how to modernize, how to standardize, how to upgrade such applications, be it with Blazor on desktop, via .NET MAUI or .NET MAUI itself. So there is pretty much diverse tech at the moment. You know, the idea is to have one platform to rule them all, but let's see what's going to happen in the years ahead with that, and we'll wait for Microsoft to say. So what does it mean for most of us or all of us? It means that we would indeed have some headaches, right? If we want to make sure that we standardize, modernize, and migrate those applications, be it from the older desktop technologies to the new ones, or from the desktop technologies to the latest web ones, right? In any case, as part of the different testing types that all of us have to deal with every single day, on the integration level, on the API level, on the unit level, regression, smoke, end-to-end, and whatnot, we would have some desktop testing types on more and more different platforms, which we already managed to discuss. Test Studio, by introducing those new features, is here to help you. And answering the very first question, what about Test Studio WPF testing? You know, WPF testing still holds the first place of the preferred .NET desktop applications, right? There is a lot of investment in WPF from the community, from Microsoft themselves. It has already been moved to .NET Core, which is also supported by Test Studio WPF testing. So WPF as a technology in general, as a framework, is here to stay. And as a functionality, as a feature in Test Studio, it is also here to stay. And it remains the go-to option for testing pure WPF applications with Test Studio. Doesn't matter if on WPF or WPF on .NET Core. Both of the options are available, are supported, will be supported, and will be invested in for the time being, right? Of course, not only because of our roadmaps and the entire community directions, but we still have quite a demand among our users for WPF testing. If you ask me, okay, but can I test with the new desktop testing features a WPF application as well? Yes, of course you can test it, because technology-wise, WPF is desktop. So with the new type of tests that we have introduced, which are called desktop tests, which we're going to see a little bit later on, you can also test a WPF application. But the way Test Studio interacts with WPF application is a little bit different. There is a different technology option on how to work with an automated WPF application and how to automate any other type of desktop application. So as an advice from myself or from the development team, if you want to stick to continue testing your WPF applications with Test Studio, stick and continue with the WPF type of tests that you're going to use. If you want to try how it looks and feel with the new desktop testing, you can do it as well. And for the ones of you who are using Telerik UI components for WPF, you have those additional benefits of the translators, those little special extensions that recognize our own UI components and give you some cool features and benefits out of the box without the necessity for you to create themselves and checks. For example, if your grids are already sorted and how many rows or columns or data items you have in a grid, all of this comes out of the box thanks to the translators. So I hope this answers the questions about what's happening with the WPF testing. Of course, any other comments or concerns or questions, follow-up questions, we can discuss towards the end of this webinar. Right, and now we move the focus to the new desktop testing that Test Studio has introduced as a UI test type. We got the best experience and features that we already had for the web and the WPF testing, and we adopted them for the rest of the desktop applications. So the look and feel or the user experience will more or less be the same in the context of a new desktop application that you're going to test, right? Still, it would be quite extremely user-friendly, if you ask me, and straightforward to record and playback those type of tests, because you're going to use the same visual recorder who could be totally codeless if you wish by default in order to create those tests. So it would be the same experience. Talking about, again, modernization of or standardization of some legacy apps, you shouldn't be worried anymore for any legacy desktop technology. Doesn't matter open source or commercial, doesn't matter if provided by Telerik or some other vendors. With the new features, Test Studio would be able to automate those. And last but not least, no longer you would have to switch context and use another tool to automate desktop applications. Remember, a lot of you who used to have some WPF apps who happened to contain some web WinForms into them for some reason. Well, Test Studio had some hurdles automating that portions of the application. So a lot of folks had to switch context. This is no longer, and this is not only valid for the different desktop applications, but it's also valid for the entire stack, be it web or desktop or responsive. You have this entire tool, this entire platform, Test Studio, that allows you to automate those technologies. How it actually works under the hood, some technology involved now. The new type of desktop tests that we're introducing is built from the ground up, and it's based on the so-called UI automation framework, which is provided by Microsoft, and practically it makes possible for Test Studio to automate any Windows app which implements and contains this automation framework, both Windows 32 and .NET. The experience, the look and feel is the same, which we already outlined, so you don't need to have some new learning curves or try to learn some new tips and tricks how to record your tests. The experience is more or less the same, and these are the most important portions of it. I have selected some screenshots here, so the visual test recorder stays the same, but it just works for desktop applications now, and this is a beautiful screenshot of Paint 3D provided by Windows. The advanced recording tools are here as well. You have the DOM Explorer or the application element Explorer, which you can see, modify in one environment, in one context with Test Studio. The step builder is here. Our favorite test step, my favorite feature actually in Test Studio is here, and you can reuse it for your desktop tests as well. The coded step, for the ones of you who feel comfortable and love working with C# and or VB.NET, you can create all of your scripts with code, or you can use some helper classes to further enhance your codeless scripts. If you want, the execution delays, different commands, annotations, manual steps, conditions, so on and so forth, along with the standard actions and verifications that are part of the step builder, the coded steps, and that's it. Something very important from technology point of view that I want to underline is the so-called application user model ID. So a lot of folks could relate that it's not that easy to find the starting file of some desktop applications like UWP type of applications or the latest MAUI apps. It's not that straightforward, let's say. So for Test Studio to be able to automate an application, web or WPF or desktop, you know, up until now you had the chance to open the default installation folder of the application, point Test Studio to the starting file. However, for such kind of applications like UWP and MAUI, it's easier to configure the application for Test Studio by means of the application user model ID. This is a special property of the application, which is alternative to the installation path of an app. It could be located, believe me, extremely easy by running only once a simple script, simple PowerShell script. And once you get the results, everything is a matter of copy paste and configuration of those model IDs, which I'm going to show you. Like this, you are quite flexible to start very easily creating your test scripts without any unnecessary hassle and stuff in order to configure and start your recording, which of course saves you a lot of time and effort when you do automation. And all of us know that this is one of the main ideas of automation, to save you time and effort. And this is also, by the way, those application user model IDs are also applicable to the latest and greatest from Microsoft by means of the .NET MAUI framework and applications built on that framework, which also eases the creation of .NET MAUI tests with Test Studio, desktop testing. Right. And with that said, I also saw some other questions in the panel. Some folks still ask, okay, it's a cool presentation and cool features, but actually, what type of desktop apps could I automate at the moment? We have prepared a slide to answer this most frequently asked question. If you ask me, so starting with the WPF apps, of course, we also have a separate type of test, which is called WPF. In Test Studio, it stays here, Win32 applications, WinForms applications, WinUI, one of the most modern, actually the most modern desktop framework released by Microsoft, UWP, MAUI, also hybrid apps, hybridly built apps, sorry, like the ones who use Electron, you know, Spotify, for example, is such application. And yes, you could also automate Delphi apps for the ones of you who still remember them or still use them. I actually think I can dig in a script that I have for Delphi app that I could show you during the demo. Basically, the rule of thumb is by using this testing automation framework by Microsoft, if the application implements it, it would be very easy for Test Studio to automate the application as well, this app as well. With this said, we're going to move through the actual demo now. Let's see some actions. Enough with the slides and talks. Now, Andy and myself are eager to show you the new features of Test Studio. But before that, I would ask you to invest some time into answering the second and last poll question here for you guys. So, talk to you in a minute or so. The question is, what technology is your desktop app in development based on? And so on, WPF and WinForms are on par, but let's see.
There's a couple notes here too. I saw folks asking about if you don't have desktop apps, and if we'll also be discussing web forms. Keep in mind that our web automation has always been a mainstay of Test Studio and continues to be developed. You know, even though today's focus has been on one of the biggest new features around desktop testing. So never fear, we still have your web covered as well.
Absolutely, and thank you, Andy, for sharing this question. You know, guys, this is the idea that you have one environment, one tool, one platform that would stick into your software development lifecycle with terms of complete UI automation, scheduling, and reporting of your test scripts. Doesn't matter web, desktop, or responsive, load, performance, and API tests. Right, Test Studio covers them all and would continue to cover them. And with regards to web forms, the technology itself, it's not that yet. There are quite so many still applications built on web forms. So we'll continue to support web forms for quite a lot of time ahead. I could assure you for that. All right, so the results from the poll, still we can see that WinForms are leading. Here the results expected. I wonder what will happen in a few years with those WinForms applications and how they're going to be modernized or migrated maybe to some other platforms. Let's see how you're gonna do that and how Test Studio could help you and ease doing that. Talking about Test Studio, you can see the tool again for the ones of you who see Test Studio for the first time. It's a desktop application. Actually, it's a WPF application itself, which you install on your premises, meaning that we don't have any access to your data at all. It's up to you how to manage and configure it. So after creating a project, you have the ability to create those different test types that we were talking about. First and foremost, the web test, which is here to stay. The responsive web test that would show how the application will behave in a different screen size. The WPF test, which is exclusively used and still recommended to be used for a pure WPF application, doesn't matter on .NET Core or not. And the new kid on the block, the desktop test. Right, how do we do our automation here in general? We have the so-called smart find logic, meaning that in order to click on an element, somewhere on your application, we rely on the different elements properties. For the web, by default, it's ID and class and name and source and href, which if we cannot find one, then we move to the forward. All of them are movable and you can reorganize them as you wish, or you can create custom ones. Right. For desktop, for the new type of testing that we currently introduce, you can specify which property to be used when creating those find expression for the different desktop elements. Usually, if there is more than one element with the same property, then a group index will be added. You need to pay attention to that. The default one is the control type name property, but you can change it if you wish to XPath or to class name. That's why, by the way, it's quite recommended just before you start the creation of your first test. It doesn't matter web or desktop, to sit down maybe with the ones who develop your application and see which would be the most stable elements for your application and bring them on the top. And I promise you, you can see that how automation would become much more easier and straightforward. Right. With that said, so I could create a new desktop test here and give it a very friendly name like desktop test 100. And there you go. Remember the different types of configurations that you have. You have a few options, right? You can use a default application path if you know the installation path folder and the starting file of the desktop app, and have one that is set as default. This is my Delphi application, by the way, which I have set as default. Or you can use the application user model ID for some applications that are very difficult to be started by the installation path, like most of the Windows Store one, UWP, MAUI, etc., etc. How it works, actually pretty much straightforward. This is an extremely simple script, which is part of our online documentation that would bring up all of those IDs on your systems. If you want to find a particular one, again, this is very well documented and explained. You don't need to remember anything, just sit down, relax, and enjoy. You can add a special parameter, which is called a string parameter, and give the specific application name, like in my case, the calculator. And when you run the script, the ID would be generated here. And all you need to do is basically grab the Windows calculator ID, go to Test Studio, and select that you want to start the application with the user model ID. Paste it. Test Studio automatically recognizes it, and when you click OK and you're ready to record, Test Studio will start, in my case, the Win11 calculator. Have something in mind, by the way, the way desktop applications are automated, and the way we automate those applications, while it's the same logic, more or less, and same experience like the web ones, here, every reaction is a little bit slower, thanks to the way desktop application works. It means that after the visual recorder fires up, some of you would be eager to start clicking some buttons and see what's going to happen. However, I would advise you to wait a second until you see those visual ready to record options that Test Studio brings to you, which means that for sure, if you press the button while it is ready to record, the button 9 will be recorded as a step. The first click, as you saw, was not recorded, right? And then if I go to the square and click it, it would bring this beautiful old school math to me, right? So again, same look and feel like on the web and WPF applications. Here you can click on the advanced highlighter and open the menu that gives access to the quick actions where you can do some verifications, wait steps which wait up until some condition is met, or just extract the result and create a variable into it. You also have the option to locate any element into the DOM and modify it. You have the option to build a step yourselves and so on and so forth. Right, after all of this is done, all you need to do is try to execute the test. You know, in Test Studio, there are few recommended ways to create such, to build your steps, and Andy would explain and show it better than me. But usually after I create a script myself, I almost never quit the application. I usually either verify something on the go, right? Or select the run to here option, which will run the script up to a specific point and then continue keeping the recorder open so that you can do all the bells and whistles of the automation features. I can pause recording here, bring 99 to the calculator, continue recording, and then I can go and run the selected step, which is the pressing of the square root button, for example, and wait for Test Studio to execute this script. As I said, the way the automation framework works is a little bit slower, and there we go. We had our square pressed, and we could proceed further with the verifications. But I'm eager to show you more and more examples, not only the simple calculator. It's a live demo here, I know, so hopefully everything goes fine with the different types of applications that we have. The other application that I have prepared is another interesting app, which is the Paint 3D from Windows, and I also have one of the MAUI apps here. So let's see which one should we go with.
And while you're bringing that up real quick, just a point to make, you didn't build Paint or Calculator, right? There was a question around, you know, how do we make a test, or how do we make an application testable? And really, I think the answer is there's nothing needed to really configure in the application. So you don't have to own the application. It's basically accessing the application executable, and as you mentioned, with the new ID option, that's the only modification you would have to make. It's not even modifying the application, right? You're really just looking up the ID that's already there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And absolutely. Thank you, Andy. And while actually we're on the topic, let me just switch context a little bit. And instead of using Paint, which comes with the Windows installation from the store, I have this MAUI app that I actually built myself. Right. It's a .NET MAUI app built with Telerik UI for .NET MAUI. It's interactive dashboard, which I have, of course, built and kept running right before the demo. Right, so this is my interactive dashboard here. So it lives on my environment. It runs on the Windows simulator for the MAUI. And all I need to do, again, when I create a desktop test here and give it a friendly name, MAUI, oops, it already exists. Should be even friendlier name like MAUI 100. When I go to that, I can again, while my application is running, I can go to my script that runs, generate the ID, because the script will recognize the already built MAUI application. It will generate this ID of this script to dashboard, and I can insert it into my configuration path here as an application user model ID, right? Which means that when I record the test, and I'm not sure if you guys noticed, the first time when I clicked record, it output it to my default old school Delphi app, but when I input the model ID, Test Studio now will open the .NET MAUI application, which I built myself, and in a few seconds it will bring up the recorder, which is here, and from here on, you know the drill. Wait for ready to record. I can see what's happening with the Bitcoin at the moment, or with the Ethereum at the moment. From this live data, I can switch on the highlighter, hover over different elements of the application, have quick actions, verification that Ethereum is here into the trending ones. I can run the entire test or just a portion of the test and see what's happening. So again, it's up to you. Nothing that's not straightforward or time consuming in order to start an application. Doesn't matter if it comes right from the shop, if it is already installed, or you built it yourself on the go. Using user application model ID makes life much easier. Right. Okay. So we're running a little bit ahead of time. I wanted to show you, just out of curiosity, you can see the grandfather of all grandfathers. I have this desktop test, which is created against Delphi app. So let's see if it will still kick in and it will work. Here it is, my beautiful old school Delphi applications, where I have a test that would input some values and then do some verifications as per those actions, right? Delphi apps are also being able to be automated with the new type of Test Studio desktop tests. With that, and there we go, all into the green. All right, and with that said, let's move forward a little bit, because we also have some other features to show. Andy, if you can share your screen and show us a beautiful test that encompasses latest and greatest from Test Studio, has some pretty stable elements that could be used and reused, and maybe you can run it in extensionless mode and see how it goes.
Yeah, thank you. Can you see my screen okay at this point?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks, Peter. And on my end, and both Peter and I, by the way, are using the dark theme. You do have a light and a dark theme. I just want to address a question real quick. Somebody mentioned about the using Microsoft Interop to check values in an Excel spreadsheet. And this is actually one of the first things that I wanted to check out when Test Studio Desktop came out. I immediately went and automated Excel. So, you know, for those of you who have followed and worked with Test Studio for a long time, you know, we usually do try to keep things as codeless as possible. Obviously, you can make everything coded, you can make everything, you know, and typically as far as that codeless goes, there's maybe 10% or so that they may need code. Well, I'd say that maybe that's now down to 5%. You know, with the addition of the desktop application testing, something like having to go check a value in an Excel spreadsheet can now be done codelessly, whereas previously that might have been a coded step in your test. So to answer that question, now the example I was going to show from a desktop standpoint, and I'll also show some from the web as well. But this desktop application, this is WinForms, and real basic, you know, as Peter showed, I'm going to just use a common feature to jump into this test and then potentially continue recording called run to here. So this will launch the app. We'll make sure to bring it to the appropriate screen here. So this is our demo application for Telerik WinForms R2 2022. We do have some versioning built into Test Studio, by the way, for working with different versions of control sets. But as you can see, pretty easily interacting with this application and these widgets. And even things like hover over, as you'll see here in a moment. It has that hover over option there as well. I think that should be the end. You could see the recording toolbar has shown up at the top here. So we're now in a live record mode. So real easy to jump in, hit record or hit execute in this case, and then continue recording on top of that, right? So just wanted to show that quick example. You know, again, there's just a high degree of usability here. You can see lots of green, lots of things that are working correctly, and a lot of options to modify your test step behavior. You know, this is really something that keeps our tests codeless, is when we run into an issue about how do I correct this test step or how do I change the behavior of a test step, a lot of tools require code at that point. We've jam-packed so many features into the test steps and the settings of the test steps that this can easily help you maintain the test without code. So things like data driving a test step or modifying a typing speed of a test step or something like that can be really easily done in Test Studio. So transitioning real quick over to a web example. Here we have a Test Studio CRUD operation using one of Peter and Maya's, both one of our favorite features called Test as Step, which, by the way, you can go grab a test and add it into a test as step. This is a test that I call a parent test because it's actually calling subtest 1, subtest 2, subtest 3. These are all tests within another test. And as you can see, it's easy to go grab that from this menu, but even easier, you can actually just drag and drop to add tests into your test as step 2, which I think is a really cool enhancement to that. So no need to even necessarily go to that menu if you don't want to. This test, by the way, I just ran this. Let's go ahead while I'm talking, in fact, show off another quick feature to run this headlessly on Microsoft Edge Chromium. Headless execution, something we added a while ago, but something that can help make your tests even quicker I believe this test, when I run it in full, usually takes maybe 2 to 3 minutes. And as you can see, it's running down on the bottom here. It's telling me that it's running. Great benefits of headless testing. First of all, it's usually about 3 times faster execution than headed. So this is a difference of opening the browser and interacting with things versus running it through the headless options. And that also allows us to work better inside of build pipelines. But in another sense, it also allows me to be free. I can actually continue working on this while that test is running because headless is not requiring my keyboard and my mouse to be taken over. So quick little feature there. And we're actually in a while loop right now. So there's some cool conditional logic in this test. There's a lot going on in this test that we won't be able to cover today, but wanted to just show you some headless execution. We can see that indeed this actually executed quite a lot. Edge Chromium Headless was the version of the browser. We had multiple iterations here of creating products in a grid, multiple iterations then of updating products in a grid, iteration 3 here, and then ultimately a delete subtest that used a conditional logic called a while loop until it, going through the grid until it finds a certain item, and then deleting that, handling confirmation dialogues. So very sophisticated testing. This one now running just about a minute to execute that test that I mentioned usually takes about 3 minutes if we do it through a headed test. So just a couple things to point out as we jump in. I'm going to see if we've got a good example here of a failure. So we will run to this point. There we go. So just showing off a little bit of that parent test with the subtests there. And here we're jumping into web automation of a very complex inline editing grid. You can see things like maximize browser, or on desktop, maximize window. We have those kind of features. Clearing browser cache, those are steps, a step that you can just add into your test as well. So really easy to start working with Test Studio. And in this case, I am hoping I caused a failure here. Oh no, we got it past it. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll do this one here. And we'll just fail a step here. We'll go ahead and run this one step just to show you some failure. I know we've shown you a lot of passing tests today, but obviously when there is a failure, you want to make sure that there's an appropriate amount of data that comes with that failure as well. So as Peter mentioned, we also have some smart behind the scenes kind of automation techniques here, some things that help our tests be more robust. So one of those things is, first of all, our smart find logic that Peter pointed out. Secondly, we actually, on the web, we have element images that work with our test steps as well. And when an element can't be found by its smart find logic, it can often be found by its image. So that's a very powerful functionality that keeps our tests passing, even though there may be some changes that were made. And then here we had a failure where you can see lots of different suggestions of how to handle the failure, images to evaluate if that failure is test related or application related, and also ways of communicating this or solving this problem, whether I have to resolve the failure myself or maybe submit that into a bug tracking system so that my dev team now knows that we found a bug, basically. So lots of these features are here to take advantage of. This way we can connect into the processes and the systems that you currently have. And when it comes to, lastly, modifying the elements of an application of a test, we'll switch over here to this one again real quick. Just to show you, I think there was a question about it. I'm going to go in and just edit this element. And you'll see that you have a lot of different options typically when it comes to this. Let me make sure I'm on the right page of that application. There we go. And you can see that it comes back with a pretty simple find logic strategy here. This one, mine defaulted to control type name. You've got all sorts of options here. You've got different operators here. You've got a combination of different filters or even parent and child filters, and really just a host of all sorts of properties that could be used to help you identify your desktop elements. So this is really kind of just that behind the scenes look to show you how Test Studio is working in the background to locate your elements. And if we can't locate your elements, try to provide you suggestions to fix broken elements and ultimately fix the broken tests. And all of this being centralized, the elements are automatically centralized and stored for you. If you're using the same element in different tests, Test Studio will keep that as one element. As you can see here, this is the same element being used in 2 different steps. So when an element is changed or updated, and you go to save that change, you'll be prompted to update that for all of the tests that that element exists in, or all of the steps that that element exists in as well. Was that all you had in mind, Peter? Is there anything else?
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. It was cool seeing the rest of the features in bulk for Test Studio. We're up until the hour as of now, so I still see that the folks are with us, and I thought I could read out loud some of the cool questions here that were asked. One of those was, does it support Delphi 7 Win32 applications, and can we automate it with the new features of Test Studio? Yep, the answer is yes. Such applications would be able to be automated by Test Studio. Of course, we encourage you to download the trial of the tool or update if you already have it and try it for yourself. We also had some not directly related to desktop testing question, but a more general one. What data input tool options do you have, like SQL, Excel? Yes, plus XML, plus different other database providers like Oracle, DBC, and whatnot. So again, you can use them to hook data into your tests and data drive them, and save a lot of time and resources and effort. Do you guys automate applications built with Telerik OpenEdge, which is another product of Progress company, but by lying more on the data layer side? If, for example, there is you guys have an OpenEdge app which outputs on the front end WinForms or Kendo UI, it would definitely be able to be automated. Kendo UI, a JavaScript web interface, is supported for years now, and with the latest release now you can automate WinForms as well. So again, we encourage you to get Test Studio and try it and see how it will work with your version of the OpenEdge applications. Will Test Studio for WinForms work with older versions of Telerik? The very first version, this is the first official version actually, R3 2022, where we officially support desktop testing. So we encourage you to use this version. The feature is not available in the previous versions. And there is one interesting feedback which I like a lot. I appreciate the light dark theme choice, but I would like to have an option to set different font sizes. Right, this is definitely a feedback that we already know and we are aware, so we have it in mind. Just a quick note for all of you guys: when you automate, and Test Studio has a lot of reminders for you on the screen, when you create your tests, make sure to keep the screen resolution at 100% scaling. It has nothing to do with the browser, for example. It is the Windows feature of scaling and fonts on from the settings. Microsoft have the tendency to change the default ones from between 125, 130, 150, depending. So, you know, in order to avoid some scrambling on the elements on the screen, and so make sure this scaling is at 100%. And if you forget, of course, Test Studio will kindly remind you with a few warnings when you create your tests. So no worries about that, right? Yep, more or less, I think the other questions were already addressed. Special thanks to the guys from the product and the development team who helped us answering of those questions. Remember, whenever you have a technical or even a not technical inquiry, question, comment, concerns, we are the one who support and create the product. We don't outsource. We are the source itself. So you get an answer to your inquiry straight from the ones, us who develop the tool, right? And with that said, I think we can call it. Just one last minute question I just saw from John. Is there integration with Azure DevOps pipelines? Absolutely. Azure DevOps, TeamCity, Bamboo, Jenkins, whatever you can think of, the most popular solutions out there. There is a straightforward integration in the terms with DevOps. You could, the way it works is that you need to have on the same environment the DevOps agent, be it Microsoft hosted or self-hosted, and the Test Studio Runtime Edition, so they could talk to each other. And after this quick configuration and setup, you know the drill. Whenever you trigger your pipelines, automation test would be started automatically and automagically. Right, I downloaded Test Studio last week for a trial run. Will the updated features be in the trial version, or do I have to download the trial again? Officially, last Wednesday was the release. So depending if you downloaded Test Studio before or after Wednesday, this is the way to check, is just go to Test Studio help, check for updates. If there is no newer version for download, you are good to go. You can sit down, enjoy the new features of Test Studio. You're welcome, and thank you, Andy, as well. One more time, thanks to anyone who attended. Have a nice remaining of your day, afternoon, or evening, and talk to you soon, guys. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.